Sometimes the most ordinary moments hide the most extraordinary transformations. When Sarah Martinez accepted an invitation to her friend's birthday party on that warm September evening, she carried nothing more dangerous than a bottle of wine and a cheerful smile. She had no training in combat, no experience with violence, and certainly no intention of becoming anyone's protector. But fate has a cruel sense of timing. Within 3 hours, this soft-spoken kindergarten teacher would face a choice that would strip away every comfortable assumption about who she was and what she was capable of. The gentle woman who walked through the front door as a welcome guest would emerge from the back window as something entirely different, a fierce guardian forged in the crucible of terror, carrying the weight of lives she had saved and a darkness she could never unsee. This is the story of how one night changed everything, and how sometimes the most unlikely heroes are born not from courage, but from the simple, devastating refusal to let evil win. Sarah Martinez had always been the type of person who noticed the small things. The way her students' faces lit up when they finally grasped a new concept. The careful way her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Chun, tended her garden each morning. The subtle changes in her friend Lisa's voice when she was hiding something troubling. It was this attention to detail that made her such a beloved kindergarten teacher, but it was also what would save lives on the night that changed everything. The invitation came on a Tuesday, delivered through a simple text message that seemed innocuous enough. Lisa Chun, her college roommate turned lifelong friend, was turning 32 and wanted to celebrate with a small gathering at her new house in the suburbs. Sarah almost declined. She had papers to grade, lesson plans to finalize, and the comfortable routine of her quiet evenings at home with her cat, Whiskers. But Lisa had been going through a rough divorce, and Sarah could hear the loneliness beneath her friend's cheerful words. Just a few close friends, Lisa had assured her over the phone. Nothing fancy, maybe some wine, good food, and hopefully some laughter. I really need some laughter, Sarah. The vulnerability in Lisa's voice made the decision easy. Sarah Martinez had never been able to turn her back on someone in need, a trait that her mother had always warned would get her into trouble someday. As it turned out, her mother was both right and wrong. It would indeed get her into trouble, but it would also reveal strength she never knew she possessed. The week leading up to the party passed in its usual rhythm. Sarah taught her 23 kindergartners about shapes and colors, helped little Tommy Peterson tie his shoes for the 100th time, and mediated a heated dispute between Emma and Jacob over who got to feed the class goldfish. Her classroom was a sanctuary of controlled chaos, filled with finger paintings, alphabet charts, and the constant hum of young minds discovering the world. On Thursday, she noticed Melissa Rodriguez, one of her quieter students, sporting a bruise on her arm. When asked about it, Melissa mumbled something about falling off her bike, but her eyes wouldn't meet Sarah's. Something about the child's demeanor triggered Sarah's protective instincts, and she made a mental note to keep a closer eye on the situation. She had seen too many signs over the years to ignore them now. That evening, Sarah called the school counselor, Mrs. Patterson, and shared her concerns. They agreed to monitor Melissa closely and document any additional signs of trouble. It was a conversation that would later feel eerily prophetic, though at the time, it seemed like standard protocol for a teacher who cared deeply about her students' well-being. Friday brought unexpected news. Dr. Williams, the principal, informed the staff that there had been a break-in at another school in the district. Nothing had been stolen, but the building had been vandalized, and there were signs that someone had been living in the empty classrooms for several days. Security would be increased at all schools, and staff were reminded to be vigilant about locking doors and reporting anything unusual. The news sent a subtle chill through Sarah, though she couldn't quite explain why. She had always felt safe in her small suburban community, where the biggest crimes were usually teenagers spray painting overpasses or the occasional shoplifting incident at the local grocery store. The idea that someone desperate enough to sleep in a school building was nearby felt like a crack in the foundation of her secure world. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching Sarah's mood as she reluctantly dragged herself to the mall to find a gift for Lisa. She wandered through department stores, overwhelmed by choices and her own indecision. Lisa had always been hard to shop for, with expensive tastes and a tendency to buy whatever she wanted for herself. Eventually, Sarah settled on a beautiful silk scarf in deep blues and greens, colors that complemented Lisa's complexion and reminded Sarah of their college days when they would spend hours discussing their dreams and fears. As she waited in line to pay, Sarah noticed a man behind her who seemed agitated. He kept checking his watch, muttering under his breath, and shifting his weight from foot to foot. His hands were dirty, his clothes wrinkled as if he had slept in them, and there was something desperate in his eyes that made Sarah uncomfortable. When he accidentally bumped into her, she caught a whiff of alcohol and something else, a sour, unwashed smell that suggested he hadn't bathed in days. "Sorry," he mumbled, but his eyes were already scanning the store, looking for something or someone. Sarah paid quickly and left, feeling an inexplicable urge to put distance between herself and the troubled stranger. She would remember that face later, when everything went wrong. The rest of Saturday passed peacefully. Sarah spent the afternoon at her local coffee shop, grading papers and planning the following week's lessons. She loved this ritual, the way the warm atmosphere and gentle background noise helped her focus. The barista, a college student named Jake who knew her order by heart, brought her usual chai latte without being asked, and they chatted briefly about his upcoming midterm exams. It was during these quiet moments that Sarah felt most centered, most like herself. She had built a life of predictable pleasures and small kindnesses, surrounded by people who appreciated her steady presence and generous heart. The idea that this carefully constructed peace could be shattered in a single evening never occurred to her. Sunday brought a call from her mother in Phoenix, checking in with a mixture of concern and mild criticism that had characterized their relationship since Sarah moved away for college. Why wasn't she dating anyone seriously? When would she consider moving closer to family? Wouldn't she be happier in a bigger city with more opportunities? Sarah fielded these familiar questions with patient humor, knowing they came from love even when they stung. "I worry about you all alone out there," her mother said, as she did in every conversation. "What if something happens? What if you need help? I'm Fina. Mom, I have good friends, a job I love, and a community that looks out for each other. Nothing's going to happen to me here." The words would haunt Sarah later, evidence of how completely wrong a person could be about the safety of their world. But in that moment, sitting in her sunny kitchen with whiskers purring on her lap, she felt nothing but certainty about the peaceful trajectory of her life. Monday and Tuesday blurred together in the familiar rhythm of teaching, planning, and caring for her students. Melissa Rodriguez seemed a bit brighter, chattering about a school project and showing no new signs of distress. Sarah allowed herself to hope that whatever had caused the bruising was an isolated incident, though she continued to watch carefully. On Tuesday evening, she finally responded to Lisa's text, confirming her attendance at Saturday's party. Lisa's excitement was palpable even through the phone screen, and Sarah found herself looking forward to the evening more than she had expected. It had been too long since she had seen her old friend, too long since she had allowed herself to step outside the comfortable boundaries of her routine. She spent Wednesday evening selecting an outfit for the party, eventually settling on a simple but elegant navy dress and comfortable flats. She wanted to look nice for Lisa without overdressing for what was supposed to be a casual gathering. As she hung the dress on her closet door, ready for Saturday, Sarah felt a flutter of anticipation mixed with her usual pre-social gathering nerves. Thursday brought another call from Lisa, this one slightly more manic than usual. The guest list had grown somewhat, Lisa explained apologetically. A few work friends, some neighbors, maybe a couple of people from her yoga class. It would still be intimate, just a bit larger than originally planned. Sarah sensed her friend's nervous energy and reassured her that everything would be wonderful, that people would have a great time regardless of the details. "You're the best, Sarah," Lisa said, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what I'd do without friends like you." Really, I mean it. There was something final about the way Lisa said it, as if she were saying goodbye rather than confirming party plans. Sarah attributed it to her friend's anxiety about the divorce and the pressure of hosting her first party in the new house. She made a mental note to arrive early and help with any last-minute preparations. Friday evening brought an unexpected encounter. Sarah was leaving the grocery store when she nearly collided with the same man from the mall, the agitated stranger with the desperate eyes. This time, he was clean-shaven and better dressed, but there was no mistaking his face or the intensity of his gaze. He seemed to recognize her too, his eyes narrowing as he studied her face. "Do I know you?" he asked, his voice carrying a hint of threat beneath the casual question. "I don't think so," Sarah replied quickly, hurrying toward her car with her groceries. She could feel him watching her as she loaded her bags and drove away, and the encounter left her with a lingering sense of unease that she couldn't shake. That night, she double-checked her locks and found herself glancing out the windows more frequently than usual. Whiskers seemed to sense her nervousness, staying closer than normal and occasionally staring at the front door as if he too felt something amiss. Sarah told herself she was being paranoid, that the stranger from the store was probably just someone she had encountered in passing around town. But deep in her subconscious, some primitive alarm was beginning to sound. The same instincts that made her such an effective teacher, that helped her recognize when a child was in trouble or when a lesson wasn't connecting, were trying to warn her about dangers she couldn't yet see clearly. She would later realize that her mind had been putting together pieces of a puzzle she didn't even know existed, preparing her for a confrontation that would test every assumption she had ever made about herself and her capacity for both courage and violence. Saturday morning dawned clear and bright, washing away the previous evening's anxiety in a flood of golden sunshine. Sarah woke feeling refreshed and optimistic, ready to celebrate her friend and enjoy an evening of good food and conversation. She spent the morning cleaning her apartment, preparing Whisker's food for the evening, and wrapping Lisa's gift with care. As she prepared for the party that would change everything, Sarah Martinez had no way of knowing that she was living through her last day of innocence, her final hours as the gentle kindergarten teacher who had never faced real violence or tested the limits of her own strength. By tomorrow, she would be someone entirely different, carrying knowledge and capabilities that would forever alter how she moved through the world. The woman who selected a bottle of wine to accompany Lisa's gift, who spent extra time on her makeup, and chose earrings that caught the light just right, was making these choices for the last time as the person she had always been. The person she would become was already stirring somewhere deep within her, waiting for the moment when ordinary life would demand extraordinary courage, and when a simple invitation to a birthday party would become the first step toward a darkness she could never have imagined. The evening air carried the scent of barbecue smoke and late-blooming roses as Sarah pulled into the driveway of Lisa's new house. The Tudor-style home sat on a quiet cul-de-sac, surrounded by mature oak trees that cast dancing shadows across the manicured lawn. Warm light spilled from the windows, and Sarah could hear laughter drifting from the backyard where the party was already in full swing. She gathered her gifts and the bottle of wine she had carefully selected, taking a moment to appreciate how normal everything felt. This was exactly what she had needed, a chance to step away from the routine pressures of teaching and simply enjoy the company of good friends. The anxiety from her encounter with the stranger the night before seemed foolish now, a product of an overactive imagination rather than any real threat. Lisa met her at the front door with a warm hug that lingered a bit longer than usual. Her friend looked stunning in a flowing emerald dress that complemented her dark hair, but Sarah noticed the slight tightness around her eyes that suggested stress beneath the party hostess smile. "You look beautiful," Sarah said, meaning it. "How are you holding up?" "Better now that you're here," Lisa replied, squeezing her hand. "Come on, let me introduce you to everyone. There are some really interesting people here tonight." The house was more crowded than Sarah had expected, with guests spilling from the living room onto the back patio. The decor was elegant, but warm, reflecting Lisa's impeccable taste and attention to detail. Professional-looking photographs lined the hallways, and fresh flowers brightened every room. It was clear that Lisa had thrown herself into making this house a home after the painful dissolution of her marriage. In the kitchen, Sarah was introduced to Marcus, a tall architect with an easy smile who worked with Lisa at her consulting firm. He was charming and attentive, asking thoughtful questions about her teaching and sharing funny stories about his own encounters with his nieces and nephews. For a moment, Sarah allowed herself to imagine what it might be like to date someone like Marcus, stable, successful, and genuinely interested in her work with children. Near the sliding glass doors that led to the patio, she met Jennifer and David, a married couple from Lisa's yoga class who owned a small bookstore downtown. They were passionate about literacy programs and immediately connected with Sarah over their shared commitment to education. Jennifer mentioned that they were looking for volunteers to help with a reading program for underprivileged children, and Sarah found herself genuinely excited about the possibility of getting involved. The back patio buzzed with conversation and laughter. String lights twinkled overhead, and citronella candles kept the mosquitoes at bay while adding a warm, flickering glow to the gathering. Sarah accepted a glass of wine from the bartender Lisa had hired for the evening. Another sign that this party had grown beyond the simple gathering originally planned. It was there by the outdoor bar that Sarah first noticed him. The man from the grocery store and the mall, the stranger with the desperate eyes who had made her so uncomfortable. But tonight he looked different, cleaned up, wearing khakis and a button-down shirt, carrying himself with the casual confidence of someone who belonged. He was talking animatedly with a small group near the pool, and when he laughed, it sounded genuine and warm. Sarah's stomach dropped. Had she been mistaken about her earlier encounters? Was this actually someone from Lisa's social circle? Someone she had encountered randomly around town without making the connection? She watched him carefully, noting how the other guests seemed comfortable with him, how naturally he fit into the conversation. When Lisa appeared at her elbow with fresh drinks, Sarah decided to ask directly, "Who's the man by the pool? In the blue shirt?" Lisa followed her gaze and smiled. "Oh, that's Rick. He's new to the neighborhood, just moved in a few weeks ago. His realtor is friends with my realtor, and she thought it would be nice for him to meet some people. He seems sweet, don't you think? Recently divorced, just like me." The explanation made sense, but something still felt off to Sarah. She watched Rick throughout the evening, noting how his eyes seemed to catalog the layout of the house, how he asked subtle questions about Lisa's living situation, whether she lived alone, how well she knew her neighbors. To others, it might have seemed like normal conversation from someone new to the area. But Sarah's instincts, honed by years of watching for signs of trouble in her students' lives, were sending up warning signals. Around 9 o'clock, as the party hit its stride, Sarah found herself in conversation with Amy, one of Lisa's work colleagues who had recently returned from self-defense class. Amy was enthusiastic about what she had learned, demonstrating basic moves and encouraging other women to consider taking similar classes. "You never know when you might need to protect yourself," Amy said, adjusting Sarah's stance as she showed her a basic escape technique. "The instructor always says that the best defense is being aware of your surroundings and trusting your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is." The words resonated with Sarah more than Amy could have known. As they practiced the basic moves, Sarah was surprised by how natural the movements felt, how quickly she picked up the techniques. Amy praised her natural athleticism and encouraged her to consider formal training. "You've got good reflexes," Amy observed, "and you're stronger than you look. Have you ever taken any martial arts or self-defense classes?" Sarah shook her head, but filed the information away. Perhaps her mother's concerns about her living alone weren't entirely unfounded. Maybe it would be wise to learn some basic protective skills, just in case. The evening continued pleasantly, with good food, flowing wine, and engaging conversation. Sarah found herself relaxing despite her earlier unease, enjoying the company and the break from her routine. Lisa seemed to be having a wonderful time, moving gracefully between groups of guests and ensuring everyone felt included and entertained. It was around 10:30 when Sarah noticed that Rick was no longer among the guests on the patio. She scanned the crowd and eventually spotted him inside the house, standing near the staircase that led to the second-floor bedrooms. He appeared to be studying the layout, his eyes moving systematically from room to room in a way that seemed more calculating than curious. When he noticed Sarah watching him, his expression changed subtly. The friendly mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something harder and more dangerous underneath. He smiled and raised his drink in her direction, but there was no warmth in his eyes. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine and quickly turned away, rejoining the conversation she had left. But she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Throughout the next hour, she caught Rick observing her from various positions around the party. It might have been mistaken for romantic interest by casual observers, but Sarah recognized it for what it was: surveillance. He was studying her the same way he had studied the house, cataloging her movements and reactions. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Sarah considered staying later to help Lisa clean up. But something about Rick's continued presence made her reluctant to be among the last to go. She made her excuses around midnight, hugging Lisa goodbye and promising to call soon. "Thank you for coming," Lisa whispered in her ear. "It means so much to have friends like you. Real friends." Again, there was something final about Lisa's words, a weight that seemed disproportionate to a simple birthday party goodbye. Sarah squeezed her friend tighter and promised to take her to lunch that week. As Sarah walked to her car, she noticed that Rick was also preparing to leave. He stood by a dark sedan parked at the end of the street, but instead of getting in, he lit a cigarette and leaned against the car, clearly in no hurry to depart. His position gave him a clear view of everyone leaving the party, and Sarah realized he was watching to see who left and who stayed behind. She drove home with her doors locked and her rearview mirror constantly checked, though she saw no signs of being followed. Her apartment had never felt more welcoming as she locked the door behind her and gathered Whiskers into her arms. The cat purred contentedly, and Sarah allowed herself to believe that her imagination had been running wild, that the stranger from her earlier encounters was indeed just a new neighbor trying to fit in. But sleep came fitfully that night, interrupted by dreams of desperate eyes and calculating stares. She woke several times, convinced she had heard footsteps outside her window or the sound of someone testing her door handle. Each time, she found nothing but the ordinary sounds of night: wind in the trees, the distant hum of traffic, the settling sounds of an old building. Sunday morning brought a call that shattered any lingering sense that the previous evening had been ordinary. Lisa's voice was shaky and frightened, barely above a whisper. "Sarah, something terrible has happened. Can you come over? Please, I need you here." Sarah dressed quickly and drove to Lisa's house, her mind racing through possibilities. Had there been an accident during cleanup? Had someone been hurt? The house looked normal from the outside, with no signs of the celebration from the night before except for a few forgotten wine glasses on the patio table. Lisa met her at the door looking pale and shaken, her party dress replaced by an oversized sweatshirt and jeans. Her hands trembled as she led Sarah into the living room, where the remnants of the party had been hastily cleaned up. "After everyone left last night," Lisa began, her voice barely steady, "I was just finishing up in the kitchen when I heard something upstairs. At first I thought maybe I'd left a window open, and it was just the wind, but then I heard footsteps, deliberate footsteps, like someone was walking around up there." Sarah felt her blood run cold. "Did you call the police?" "I was too scared to move. I just stood there in the kitchen, listening. And then I heard him coming down the stairs, real slow and careful, like he didn't want the steps to creak. I hid in the pantry and waited, just praying he would take whatever he wanted and leave." The story unfolded in broken pieces. Lisa had stayed hidden in the pantry for what felt like hours, listening to someone move through her house. She could hear drawers being opened, papers being shuffled, the sound of someone going through her personal belongings with systematic thoroughness. It wasn't like he was looking for money or electronics, Lisa explained. He was going through my mail, my address book, even my photo albums. Like he was trying to learn about me, about my life. When the sounds finally stopped, and Lisa was sure the intruder had left, she had crept out of the pantry to find her house violated but not burglarized. Nothing valuable had been taken, but her private papers were scattered, her personal photographs disturbed, and there were muddy footprints on the carpet that definitely hadn't been there during the party. Most disturbing of all was what she found on her kitchen counter. One of the name tags from the party, with Rick written in block letters, left deliberately where she would find it. It was a message, a signature, a promise of return. As Lisa finished her story, Sarah felt the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with horrifying clarity. The desperate man from a mall and grocery store. The calculating stranger who had studied Lisa's house during the party. The way he had watched the guests leave, noting who stayed and who went home. This hadn't been a random break-in or a crime of opportunity. This had been reconnaissance, the first stage of something much more sinister. "We need to call the police right now," Sarah said, reaching for her phone. But Lisa grabbed her arm, stopping her. "What if he's watching? What if calling the police makes him angry?" "Sarah, I don't think this is over. I think he's just getting started, and I don't know what he wants from me." Looking at her friend's frightened face, Sarah realized that the comfortable assumptions of her safe, predictable world had just crumbled entirely. Evil had found its way into their quiet community, and it had been studying them, learning about them, preparing for something that neither of them could yet fully comprehend. The birthday party that had seemed so normal, so pleasantly ordinary, had actually been a hunting ground. And now, as Sarah held her trembling friend and tried to make sense of what they were facing, she understood that their real ordeal was just beginning. The man who called himself Rick had made his intentions clear with that abandoned name tag. This was personal, deliberate, and far from over. What Sarah didn't yet realize was that she herself had also been marked, cataloged as an obstacle to be dealt with or a target to be pursued. The woman who had lived her entire life without violence was about to discover capabilities she never knew she possessed, pushed to extremes that would transform her from prey into predator, from victim into guardian. The real test of who Sarah Martinez could become was still hours away, but the countdown had already begun. The police officer who responded to Lisa's call was young and earnest, but Sarah could see the skepticism in his eyes as he took notes about the break-in. Nothing had been stolen. There were no signs of forced entry. The muddy footprints could have come from any number of party guests. The name tag, while disturbing, wasn't exactly evidence of crime. "Ma'am, I understand this is frightening," Officer Bradley said, closing his notebook with a decisive snap. "But without more concrete evidence, there's not much we can do except file a report. I'd recommend changing your locks, maybe installing a security system, and, of course, call us immediately if anything else happens." After he left, Sarah and Lisa sat in the kitchen drinking coffee that had long gone cold, both lost in their own thoughts. The official dismissal of their concerns felt like abandonment, leaving them to face an unknown threat with nothing but their own resources and growing fear. "Maybe I'm overreacting," Lisa said, though her voice lacked conviction. "Maybe it really was just a random break-in, and I'm reading too much into it because I'm still shaken up from the divorce." But Sarah couldn't forget the calculating look in Rick's eyes, the systematic way he had studied the house and its occupants. Her teacher's instincts, trained to recognize patterns and subtle signs of trouble, were screaming that this was no random event. "I don't think you're overreacting," Sarah said carefully. "I think we need to be very careful and very aware. This man, Rick, he was at the mall and the grocery store before your party. He's been watching, learning. That's not normal behavior." They spent the afternoon researching home security options and locksmith services. Sarah stayed with Lisa while new locks were installed and a basic alarm system was set up. As evening approached, neither woman wanted to be alone, so they ordered takeout and decided Sarah would spend the night on the couch. It was around 10 o'clock when the first call came. Lisa's phone rang, but when she answered, there was only breathing on the other end. The call lasted nearly a minute before the line went dead. 20 minutes later, it happened again. Then again. By midnight, the calls were coming every 15 minutes, always the same pattern. Heavy breathing, sometimes what sounded like whispered words too low to understand, then silence. Lisa stopped answering after the fifth call, but the ringing continued throughout the night, preventing either woman from sleeping. "He's testing us," Sarah realized as dawn broke, and the calls finally stopped. "He wants us to know he can reach us whenever he wants. He's trying to make us feel helpless and afraid." The strategy was working. Both women were exhausted and on edge, jumping at every sound and constantly checking the locks and windows. But Sarah noticed something else happening inside herself. Alongside the fear was a growing anger. How dare this predator terrorize her friend? How dare he invade their peaceful lives and fill them with dread? Monday morning brought a call to Lisa's workplace. A man claiming to be conducting a survey asked detailed questions about Lisa's schedule, her work responsibilities, even her lunch habits. The receptionist, trained to be helpful, provided more information than she should have before Lisa arrived and put a stop to it. That afternoon, Sarah's own phone rang while she was teaching her kindergarten class. She let go to voicemail, focused on helping her students with their art projects. But when she checked the message during her break, her blood ran cold. "Hello, Sarah," the voice said, low and intimate as if they were old friends. "I notice you're the party. You seem like such a caring person, always looking out for others. I think we should get to know each other better. I think we have a lot in common." The call had come from an untraceable number, but Sarah recognized the voice. It was Rick, and somehow he had gotten her personal information. The realization that she was now also being targeted sent a shock of terror through her system, followed immediately by a surge of protective rage. Sarah called Lisa immediately, and they agreed to meet at the police station after school. This time, they had concrete evidence: the harassing phone calls, the workplace surveillance, the direct threat to Sarah. Surely this would be enough to get official help. Detective Martinez, no relation despite the shared name, was more receptive than the first officer had been. She listened carefully to their story, asked detailed questions, and seemed to understand the escalating pattern of stalking behavior. "This individual is displaying classic predatory patterns," she explained, making notes in a thick file. "The reconnaissance phase, the psychological intimidation, the expansion to include friends and family members. Unfortunately, until he commits a more serious crime, our options are limited. But we can increase patrol activity in your neighborhoods, and I'll make sure this case gets priority attention." She provided them with information about protective orders, safety planning, and resources for stalking victims. But as they left the police station, both women felt more vulnerable than ever. They were being hunted by someone who seemed to know all the legal loopholes, someone who was careful to stay just barely within the bounds of what law enforcement could address. That evening, Sarah insisted on staying at Lisa's house again. They had dinner delivered and spent the time reinforcing their security measures, additional door alarms, motion sensor lights for the yard, and a detailed safety plan for various scenarios. Sarah surprised herself by taking charge of the preparations, her mind automatically strategizing defensive positions and escape routes. The calls resumed that night, but this time they were different. Instead of just breathing, Rick began speaking in a conversational tone, as if he were sitting in the room with them. "Lisa, you look so beautiful at your party," he said during one call. "That green dress really brought out your eyes. And, Sarah, I loved watching you help your friend. Such loyalty, such dedication. I admire that in a person." The intimate knowledge, the casual tone, the way he spoke as if they were willing participants in his twisted game. It was psychological warfare of the most sophisticated kind. Sarah realized they were dealing with someone who understood exactly how to break down his victim's sense of safety and control. By Tuesday morning, both women were running on caffeine and adrenaline. Sarah had called in sick to work, unwilling to leave Lisa alone and unable to concentrate on teaching while worrying about her friend's safety. They spent the day researching Rick's background, trying to trace his real identity through online searches and public records. Their investigation revealed disturbing information. The address he had given Lisa's realtor friend belonged to a vacant house that had been empty for months. The phone number associated with his name was disconnected. Even his physical description seemed to be inconsistent. Different people remembered him differently, as if he were skilled at altering his appearance to avoid detection. He's done this before, Sarah realized as they compiled their findings. This is too organized, too systematic to be his first time. He's practiced at this. The breakthrough came Wednesday morning when Lisa remembered something from the party. Rick had mentioned being recently divorced, and during their conversation, he had referenced a specific restaurant where he claimed to have had his last good meal with his ex-wife. It was a small detail, but it gave them their first real lead. Sarah drove to the restaurant, a cozy Italian place about 20 minutes from Lisa's neighborhood, and spoke with the manager. She provided Rick's description and asked if anyone matching it had been a regular customer recently. The manager, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, immediately grew concerned when Sarah explained she was trying to trace someone who was harassing her friend. "I remember him," she said, lowering her voice. "He used to come in a lot, maybe 6 months ago. Always alone, always paying cash. But I had to ban him from the restaurant because he was making the female staff uncomfortable. He would ask personal questions, try to get their schedules, offer to walk them to their cars. Classic creepy behavior." More importantly, she remembered that Rick had once used a credit card when he thought his cash might not cover the bill. She still had the receipt, with a name that was different from the one he had given at Lisa's party, Martin Kowalski. Armed with a real name, Sarah and Lisa returned to Detective Martinez with their findings. A background check on Martin Kowalski revealed a troubling history. 2 previous restraining orders from women in other states, multiple arrests for stalking and harassment, and a pattern of escalating behavior that had eventually led to a conviction for breaking and entering. "This man is dangerous," Detective Martinez confirmed, studying the file with growing concern. "His pattern shows clear escalation over time, and the fact that he's now targeting multiple victims suggests he may be building towards something more serious than harassment." But even with this information, the detective explained, they still couldn't arrest Kowalski until he violated a specific law. The best they could do was issue a restraining order and increase surveillance in the areas where he was likely to appear. That afternoon, as they waited for the restraining order to be processed, Sarah noticed a dark sedan parked across the street from Lisa's house. The same model car she had seen Kowalski standing beside after the party. As she watched from behind the curtains, she could see a figure in the driver's seat, though the distance and tinted windows made it impossible to identify him clearly. The psychological effect was exactly what Kowalski intended. Even if it wasn't him in the car, even if it was just a neighbor or a delivery driver, his previous actions had trained them to see threat in every shadow, to question every unfamiliar face or vehicle. He was stealing their peace of mind, their ability to feel safe in their own community. That evening, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She couldn't continue living in fear, couldn't watch her friend deteriorate under the constant psychological pressure of being stalked. If law enforcement couldn't protect them until after Kowalski committed a more serious crime, then she would have to take steps to protect them herself. She started by researching self-defense classes in the area, but quickly realized that basic martial arts training wouldn't prepare her for dealing with an experienced predator who had been planning his attack for weeks. She needed something more immediate, more practical. The gun store owner, a gruff but knowledgeable man named Pete, took one look at Sarah's frightened but determined face and understood exactly what she needed. He spent 2 hours with her, explaining different types of firearms, safety procedures, and the legal implications of self-defense. Sarah had never imagined herself as someone who would own a weapon, but circumstances were forcing her to reconsider many of her assumptions about who she was and what she was capable of. The most important thing Pete explained as he showed her how to properly hold and aim a pistol is that you never draw a weapon unless you're prepared to use it. And you never use it unless you genuinely believe your life or someone else's life is in immediate danger. This isn't about scaring someone away. This is about stopping a threat permanently. The weight of the gun in her hands felt both foreign and strangely natural. Sarah discovered that she had excellent hand-eye coordination and a steady aim. Within an hour of practice at the shooting range, she was consistently hitting the center of the target from varying distances. "You're a natural," Pete observed. "Have you done any shooting before?" Sarah shook her head, but she was beginning to understand that stress and danger were revealing capabilities she had never known she possessed. The gentle kindergarten teacher was still there, but something harder and more determined was emerging alongside her. Thursday morning brought a new escalation. Sarah arrived at Lisa's house to find her friend standing in the driveway, staring at her car. All 4 tires had been slashed during the night, and scratched into the paint on the driver's side door was a message: soon. The restraining order had been served to Kowalski the previous afternoon, but clearly it had done nothing to deter him. If anything, it seemed to have provoked him into more direct action. The psychological warfare was giving way to physical intimidation, and Sarah realized they were approaching a critical moment in Kowalski's timeline. "He's going to escalate again," she told Detective Martinez when they reported the vandalism. "This is building towards something bigger. He's not going to be satisfied with just scaring us much longer." The detective agreed, but was hamstrung by the same legal limitations that had frustrated them all week. Vandalism was a misdemeanor, and even with Kowalski's history, it wasn't enough to justify an arrest warrant that would stick. That afternoon, while Lisa was at work under the protection of building security, Sarah made another decision. She drove to a camping supply store and purchased equipment that transformed Lisa's house into a fortress. Motion detectors for every approach to the building. Trail cameras to monitor the perimeter. Portable alarms for doors and windows. Emergency communication equipment in case phone lines were cut. But even as she worked to secure their physical safety, Sarah knew that their real protection would ultimately depend on their ability to defend themselves when Kowalski finally made his move. Because she was now certain that he would make a move, the only questions were when, how, and whether they would be ready for him. As Thursday evening settled over the quiet neighborhood, Sarah sat in Lisa's living room, checking and rechecking the pistol Pete had sold her. She had never imagined that her life would come to this moment, armed and waiting for a predator to show his true intentions. But she was discovering that when ordinary life demanded extraordinary measures, she was capable of rising to meet the challenge. The gentle teacher who had worried about bruises on her students' arms was still there, but she was no longer the only part of Sarah's identity. Something fierce and protective had awakened, something that would not allow evil to triumph without a fight. Tomorrow would bring the confrontation that had been building all week, and Sarah Martinez was going to be ready. Friday evening arrived with an oppressive stillness that seemed to settle over Lisa's neighborhood like a heavy blanket. Sarah had spent the day installing the last of their security measures, while Lisa worked from home, neither woman speaking much about what they both sensed was coming. The trail cameras had already captured images of Kowalski conducting surveillance from various positions around the house, always careful to stay just outside the range of actionable evidence. At 7 o'clock, as darkness began to gather, Sarah performed a final check of their defenses. Every door was double-locked and alarmed. Windows were secured with additional latches and motion sensors. The pistol was loaded and within easy reach, though Sarah prayed she would never need to use it. Emergency numbers were programmed into both women's phones, and Detective Martinez was on standby for immediate response. "Maybe he won't come tonight," Lisa said, though her voice carried no conviction. Maybe the restraining order actually worked, and he's moved on to easier targets. Sarah looked at her friend and saw the same mixture of hope and terror that she felt in her own chest. They both knew Kowalski was done with psychological warfare. The slashed tires and scratched message had been his declaration of intent. Tonight would bring the confrontation that had been building all week. The first sign of trouble came at 8:30. The motion sensor near the back gate triggered its silent alarm, sending a signal to the small monitoring device Sarah had positioned in the kitchen. She checked the corresponding trail camera feed on her tablet and felt her blood turn to ice. A figure in dark clothing was moving deliberately through the shadows at the edge of Lisa's property, testing the fence line and studying the house's rear approaches. "He's here," Sarah whispered, showing Lisa the tablet screen. The figure was too far away and the lighting too poor to definitively identify, but his height and build matched Kowalski's profile. More importantly, his movements were purposeful and predatory, the careful advance of someone who had planned this moment in detail. Lisa immediately called 911, but they both knew that response time in their suburban area could be 15 minutes or more. Whatever was going to happen would be over long before help arrived. They were on their own, facing a predator who had been planning this encounter while they had been scrambling to catch up. For the next 20 minutes, nothing happened. The figure had disappeared from camera range, leaving them to wonder if he had retreated or if he was simply repositioning for a better approach. The waiting was almost worse than action would have been. The tension of not knowing when or how he would strike, the constant hypervigilance that left every nerve ending raw and exposed. At 9 o'clock, all the lights in the house went out simultaneously. Sarah had expected this and had prepared accordingly. Emergency flashlights were positioned throughout the house, and her tablet was running on battery power, still showing feeds from the trail cameras. But in the sudden darkness, even with preparation, both women felt the spike of primal fear that Kowalski was counting on to disorient and control them. "Electrical box," Sarah whispered. "He's cut the main power. That means he's been studying the house layout even more carefully than we thought." Through the tablet screen, they watched as motion sensors around the perimeter began triggering in sequence. Kowalski was no longer trying to hide his presence. He was announcing himself, letting them know that their fortress was being systematically breached by someone who understood their defenses and had planned countermeasures. The first breach came at the basement window that faced the wooded area behind the house. Sarah heard the sound of breaking glass, followed by the sharp beep of a window alarm being triggered. Her hands moved automatically to the pistol, and she was surprised by how steady they felt. All the fear and anxiety of the past week seemed to crystallize into cold, focused determination. "Lisa, get behind the kitchen island and stay down," Sarah commanded, her voice carrying an authority she had never heard in herself before. "No matter what happens, don't come out until I tell you it's safe." She could hear Kowalski moving through the basement now, his footsteps deliberately loud enough to be heard upstairs. He was still playing psychological games, trying to maximize their fear before the final confrontation. But Sarah found that her terror was transforming into something else, a protective fury that burned away doubt and hesitation. The basement door opened with a long, drawn-out creak. Kowalski was taking his time, savoring the moment, confident that he was dealing with two helpless victims who would collapse under pressure. Sarah positioned herself at the top of the basement stairs, pistol raised and ready, drawing on everything Pete had taught her about proper stance and aim. "I know you're up there, Sarah," Kowalski called from the darkness below. His voice was calm, conversational, as if they were old friends having casual chat. "You and Lisa have been very difficult to get to know. All those locks, all those alarms. But here we are at last, just the three of us." Sarah didn't respond. Every instinct told her to engage, to demand that he leave, to try to reason with him. But she remembered Pete's training: never negotiate with someone who has already committed to violence. Save words for afterward. Focus on stopping the threat. Kowalski began climbing the stairs, still talking in that eerily casual tone. "You know, Sarah, I've been watching you for days now. You're much stronger than you look, much more capable. I think you and I are going to have some very interesting conversations." The way he said conversations made Sarah's skin crawl. She understood now that his interest in her wasn't romantic. It was predatory in a much more fundamental way. He collected women, studied them, broke them down psychologically before moving on to whatever final act he had planned. The realization filled her with cold rage. When Kowalski's head appeared at the top of the stairs, Sarah got her first clear look at him in the dim emergency lighting. He was larger than she had remembered from the party, and there was something in his hands that glinted metallically in the shadows. A knife, she realized. He had come prepared for close-quarters violence. "There you are," he said, smiling when he saw her positioned at the end of the hallway. "I have to say, I'm impressed. Most women would be cowering in a closet by now. But not you. You're going to fight, aren't you?" The anticipation in his voice made Sarah understand that this was what he had been hoping for. The stalking, the psychological pressure, the systematic intimidation. It had all been foreplay for this moment when he could finally engage in the physical violence that truly satisfied him. "You need to leave," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "The police are already on their way. You still have time to walk away from this." Kowalski laughed, a sound that carried no warmth or humor. "Oh, Sarah. Sweet, naive Sarah. Do you really think the police matter at this point? Do you think there's any scenario where this ends with me just walking away?" He began moving down the hallway toward her, knife held casually at his side, completely unafraid of the weapon she was pointing at him. Sarah realized he either didn't believe she would use it, or he didn't care. The realization that she was facing someone with nothing to lose sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with understanding the stakes. "You know what I think?" Kowalski continued, closing the distance between them with measured steps. "I think you've never hurt anyone in your entire life. I think you're a kindergarten teacher who wouldn't hurt a fly. I think that gun is shaking in your hands right now because you know you don't have what it takes to pull the trigger." He was wrong about the shaking. Sarah's hands were rock steady, her aim fixed on the center of his chest. But he was right about her never having hurt anyone before. Until this moment, violence had been completely foreign to her nature. She had never even been in a serious argument, let alone a life-or-death confrontation. But as Kowalski took another step forward, Sarah felt something fundamental shift inside her. The protective instincts that made her such an effective teacher, that had her looking out for bruised children and frightened friends, crystallized into lethal focus. This man had terrorized Lisa, had invaded their home, had come here with the intention of causing irreparable harm. He was a predator, and she was the only thing standing between him and his prey. "Last warning," Sarah said, her voice carrying a hardness that surprised them both. "Stop where you are and leave this house." Kowalski's expression changed as he finally registered that the woman facing him was not the helpless victim he had expected. There was something in her eyes that he had not anticipated, a resolve that went beyond fear or desperation. For the first time since entering the house, he hesitated. But predators are dangerous when cornered, and Kowalski had invested too much in this moment to retreat now. Instead of backing down, he raised the knife and lunged forward, covering the remaining distance between them in 2 quick strides. Sarah fired. The sound was deafening in the enclosed hallway, and the muzzle flash illuminated Kowalski's shocked expression as the bullet took him in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him crashing into the wall. The knife clattered across the hardwood floor, sliding out of reach. But Kowalski wasn't finished. Despite the wound, despite the blood streaming down his arm, he scrambled for the fallen knife with the desperate strength of someone who had nothing left to lose. Sarah realized that wounding him had only made him more dangerous, not less. "Stay down," she shouted, but Kowalski was already moving, his good hand closing around the knife handle. There was no hesitation left in Sarah now, no room for mercy or doubt. When he raised the weapon again and turned toward her with murder in his eyes, she fired twice more. The first bullet took him in the chest, the second in the abdomen. Kowalski dropped immediately, the knife falling from nerveless fingers as he collapsed onto the hallway floor. His breathing was labored and wet, and Sarah could see that he was dying. She kept the pistol trained on him as she backed toward the kitchen, her hands finally beginning to shake as the immediate threat passed. "Lisa, it's over. You can come out now." Lisa emerged from behind the kitchen island, her face pale with shock. She looked at Sarah, then at the bleeding man in the hallway, then back at Sarah again, as if she couldn't reconcile the gentle friend she had known with the woman who had just killed to protect them both. The police arrived 7 minutes later, followed quickly by paramedics who confirmed what Sarah already knew. Martin Kowalski was dead. Detective Martinez took Sarah's statement while crime scene technicians photographed the basement break-in, the electrical tampering, and the aftermath of the confrontation in the hallway. "You did exactly what you had to do," Detective Martinez assured her as they sat in the kitchen hours later. "This man had a history of escalating violence, and based on the evidence, there's no question that you and Lisa were in immediate mortal danger." But even as the detective spoke, Sarah was struggling to process what she had become. The woman who had arrived at Lisa's birthday party just a week earlier would never have imagined herself capable of taking a human life. That woman had been gentle, peaceful, devoted to nurturing young minds and avoiding conflict. Yet when the moment came, when evil had entered their home with the intention of causing irreparable harm, she had not hesitated. Some deeper part of herself, some primitive protective instinct, had emerged and done what was necessary to defend the innocent. She had become a killer, but in doing so, she had also become a guardian. As dawn broke over the quiet suburban neighborhood, Sarah Martinez sat in her friend's kitchen, still holding the weapon that had saved their lives. She knew that she would never again be the same person who had worried about her students' scraped knees and helped them tie their shoes. That woman was gone, replaced by someone harder, more dangerous, but also more aware of the darkness that existed in the world and her own capacity to stand against it. The gentle kindergarten teacher was still there, still part of who she was. But now she was also something else, a protector who had been tested by violence and had not been found wanting. The transformation was complete, irreversible, and absolutely necessary. Because evil existed in the world, and sometimes it took a guardian to stand between the predators and their prey. The weeks following the shooting passed in a strange, disjointed rhythm that Sarah struggled to navigate. The legal aftermath was surprisingly straightforward. Martin Kowalski's history of stalking and violence, combined with the clear evidence of breaking and entering with deadly intent, made her case of self-defense ironclad. The district attorney didn't even convene a grand jury, declaring the shooting fully justified within 48 hours of the incident. But the emotional and psychological aftermath was infinitely more complex. Sarah returned to her classroom the following Monday, hoping that the familiar routine of teaching would help her process what had happened. Her students welcomed her back with their usual enthusiasm, completely unaware that their gentle Miss Martinez had killed a man just days earlier. The disconnect between their innocent chatter about weekend adventures and the violence she had witnessed felt surreal. During lunch break, Sarah found herself studying her hands as she ate her sandwich. These same hands had held a loaded weapon and made the decision to end a human life. They looked exactly the same as they had a week earlier, but she knew they would never feel the same again. There was a weight to them now, a knowledge of what they were capable of when circumstances demanded it. Principal Williams had been supportive but concerned, offering counseling resources and suggesting that Sarah might want to take additional time off to recover. But Sarah found that being away from her students made everything worse. In the classroom, surrounded by innocent energy and focused on the important work of education, she could almost pretend that the darkness hadn't touched her. At home alone, the memories came flooding back with devastating clarity. Lisa was struggling even more visibly. Despite being the intended victim, despite owing her life to Sarah's quick thinking and willingness to use deadly force, she seemed almost afraid of her friend now. Their conversations were stilted and awkward, full of careful politeness that had never existed in their relationship before. "I keep thinking about how calm you were," Lisa said during one of their uncomfortable coffee meetings 2 weeks after the incident. "Even before he came up the stairs, you were so controlled. Like you knew exactly what you were going to have to do." Sarah recognized the question hidden beneath Lisa's observation. How had a kindergarten teacher been able to kill a man with such apparent ease? What did that say about who Sarah really was beneath her gentle exterior? These were questions that Sarah was asking herself every day, and she didn't have good answers for either of them. The truth was that Sarah hadn't felt calm at all. She had been terrified, running on pure adrenaline and protective instinct. But when the moment came, when Kowalski had lunged at her with deadly intent, something deeper than thought had taken over. It wasn't calculation or planning. It was the most primitive and powerful drive imaginable, the drive to protect the innocent from predators. 3 weeks after the shooting, Sarah received an unexpected visitor at school. Detective Martinez appeared at her classroom door after the final bell, looking uncharacteristically hesitant. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by," she said as Sarah cleaned up the day's art supplies. "I want to check on how you're doing, and I have something I think you should know." They walked to the small teacher's lounge, where Detective Martinez spread out a thick file on the table. Sarah recognized some of the photographs, images from Kowalski's apartment that the police had searched after his death. "We've been working with other jurisdictions to piece together Kowalski's full history," the detective explained. "What we found is disturbing. He wasn't just a stalker, Sarah. He was much worse than that." The file contained evidence linking Kowalski to at least 3 other incidents across 2 states. A young woman in Oregon who had disappeared after being stalked for months, her body never found. A college student in Nevada who had survived a brutal assault but could never positively identify her attacker. A mother of 2 in Colorado who had been found dead in her home, the case officially unsolved but bearing all the hallmarks of Kowalski's methodology. "Based on what we've uncovered," Detective Martinez continued, "we believe Martin Kowalski was a serial killer who was escalating toward his most violent phase when you stopped him. If you hadn't acted when you did, Lisa would certainly be dead. And, based on his interest in you, there would have been other victims after her." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had spent weeks agonizing over whether she had done the right thing, whether there had been another way to handle the situation, whether she was now a killer who had to live with unnecessary blood on her hands. But the evidence in front of her painted a clear picture. She hadn't just defended herself and Lisa. She had stopped a predator who was responsible for multiple deaths and would have continued killing until someone stopped him. "You saved lives that night," Detective Martinez said quietly. "Not just your own and Lisa's, but the lives of women Kowalski would have targeted in the future. I know that doesn't make it easier to live with, but I thought you should know the full truth." That evening, Sarah sat in her apartment with whiskers curled on her lap, processing this new information. The weight of taking a life would never fully leave her, but understanding the broader context helped her make peace with her actions. She hadn't become a killer. She had become a guardian, someone willing to stand between evil and innocence, even at great personal cost. The real transformation became apparent a month later when Sarah noticed troubling signs with one of her new students, a quiet 6-year-old named Emma, who had transferred to the school mid-semester. The child was withdrawn, anxious, and showed classic signs of trauma that Sarah's newly heightened awareness made impossible to ignore. Instead of simply reporting her concerns to the school counselor as she had done in the past, Sarah found herself taking a more active approach. She arranged for a private meeting with Emma's mother, prepared with resources and information about domestic violence support services. When the mother broke down and admitted that Emma's father had been escalating his abuse, Sarah didn't just offer sympathy. She offered concrete help. Sarah personally drove Emma and her mother to a women's shelter, helped them navigate the legal system to obtain a restraining order, and stayed involved throughout their transition to safety. When Emma's father violated the restraining order and attempted to approach the child at school, Sarah was ready. She had coordinated with security, had emergency contacts memorized, and positioned herself as a physical barrier between the abuser and his intended victims. The confrontation was brief, but telling. When Emma's father saw Sarah's steady gaze and unwavering stance, when he recognized something hard and implacable in her demeanor, he backed down without a fight. Word spread quickly through the school's parent community that Miss Martinez was not someone to be crossed when it came to child safety. This incident marked the beginning of Sarah's reputation as more than just a dedicated teacher. Parents began approaching her when they suspected abuse or neglect in other families. Other teachers started consulting her when they noticed troubling signs in their students. Without consciously deciding to do so, Sarah had become the person others turned to when darkness threatened the innocent. The change in how people perceived her was subtle but unmistakable. There was a new respect in their voices when they spoke to her, an acknowledgement that she possessed capabilities beyond what her gentle exterior suggested. Children who were being hurt at home seemed to gravitate toward her classroom, sensing safety in her presence even when they couldn't articulate why. 6 months after the shooting, Sarah made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. She enrolled in formal self-defense training, not just basic classes, but serious martial arts instruction. She obtained additional firearms training and a concealed carry permit. She studied criminal psychology and victim advocacy, turning her natural protective instincts into educated expertise. "Why are you doing all this?" Lisa asked during one of their slowly healing coffee meetings. Their friendship was finding new ground, based on shared trauma, but also on Lisa's growing understanding of who Sarah had become. "Because there are more predators out there," Sarah answered simply. "And there are people who need protection. I've learned that I'm capable of providing that protection. So I have a responsibility to be as prepared as possible." Lisa studied her friend's face, seeing the subtle changes that 6 months had wrought. Sarah looked the same on the surface, still the caring teacher who worried about her students and volunteered for school fundraisers. But there was something new in her eyes, a depth of knowledge about the world's darkness and her own capacity to combat it. "Aren't you afraid?" Lisa asked, "of what you might have to do again someday?" Sarah considered the question carefully. She was afraid, but not of having to defend the innocent again. She was afraid of failing to act when action was needed, of letting evil triumph because she hesitated or doubted herself. "I'm more afraid of doing nothing," she said finally. "I'm more afraid of knowing that I could have helped someone and choosing not to because it was dangerous or difficult." As Sarah's first year as a guardian passed, she began to understand that her transformation hadn't been a sudden change, but rather the revelation of something that had always been part of her nature. Her protectiveness toward her students, her instinctive response to signs of trouble, her inability to ignore suffering. These had always been her defining characteristics. The confrontation with Kowalski had simply revealed the full extent of what she was willing to do to defend those who couldn't defend themselves. She still taught kindergarten, still loved helping young minds discover the world around them. But now she also served as an unofficial advocate for abused children, a resource for parents facing domestic violence, and a quiet but effective deterrent to those who would prey on the vulnerable. The gentle teacher remained, but she was now supported by a fierce guardian who would never again hesitate when evil threatened innocence. On the first anniversary of the shooting, Sarah visited Lisa for dinner. They sat on the back patio where a year earlier guests had laughed and celebrated while a predator watched and planned. The evening was peaceful, filled with the ordinary sounds of suburban life that Sarah had learned never to take for granted. "Do you ever regret it?" Lisa asked as they watched the sun set over the neighborhood. "Not the shooting itself, but what it changed in you. Do you ever wish you could go back to being who you were before?" Sarah thought about the question as she had many times over the past year. The woman she had been before that night had lived in a safer world, surrounded by comfortable assumptions about the goodness of people and the rarity of true evil. That woman had been happier in many ways, unburdened by the knowledge of what she might be called upon to do. But that woman had also been less capable of protecting the people she cared about. She had been vulnerable to predators, naive about the warning signs of danger, and ultimately helpless when confronted with violence. The transformation had been painful and irreversible, but it had also been necessary. "I miss the innocence sometimes," Sarah said finally. "I miss believing that the world was fundamentally safe, that people were basically good, that terrible things only happen to other people. But I can't regret becoming someone who can stand against the darkness when it threatens people I care about. As night fell over the quiet neighborhood, Sarah Martinez sat with her friend and reflected on the year that had changed everything. She was no longer the same woman who had arrived at a birthday party with nothing more dangerous than a bottle of wine and a cheerful smile. She was something new, something harder, and more dangerous, but also something necessary. The gentle kindergarten teacher remained at her core, still devoted to nurturing young minds and protecting innocent hearts. But now she was also a guardian, someone who had looked into the face of evil and had not flinched, someone who had paid the price of transformation to ensure that others could continue to live in the light. Sarah had arrived as a guest at that birthday party so long ago, but she had emerged as something much more important, a protector, a shield between the innocent and those who would harm them, a reminder that sometimes the most unlikely heroes are forged in the crucible of necessity and tempered by the unwavering refusal to let evil win.